Okay, back again for week 4, doing some more tweaking to my video layout. I put my video down here, so hopefully it won't overlap on any of the input, of any of the text that I want to show you. It'll be mostly in VS Code today, so I think we'll be okay. Although I will be bringing up my ChatGPT, not my Google Gemini prompt conversation, because just to recap where we got to last time was I had my basic transpiler doing the same sort of functionality that I had my bash script transpiler doing, and that was all written in Basic09. So this past week my focus was on adding some additional features and functionality to my transpiling process. And the focus for this week was also back on the bash side of things until I got that script working properly. And next week I'll be doing basically this exact same process, but for Basic09. So let me show you the prompt for this week. And again, this will be checked in under week 4 transpiler modifications.md under my prompts folder of the Nitro OS 9 examples. Under my project, again, I'll put a link in the description below to the project. I'll put links into specifically this prompt, as well as maybe a couple of the other source files too, just if you wanted to go and take a look at them while you're going through this. So my transpiler, I created a document that basically in MD format, markdown format, that gives a fully detailed specification of what it was I was looking for. And as a bit of an interesting exercise, I thought I'd try handing the same prompt and source code examples and my bash script, the previous bash script from last week, to ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, and to compare the results given identical prompts and source data. What does each of the different platforms give you as sort of outputs? So here's the main part of this. I said I'm writing a transpiler process that currently accepts a source file path string, a target file path string, and a folder path string containing 3 name files, types, constants, and variables.b09. I have 2 versions of this process, one written in awk that is run via a bash script, and one written in Basic09 that is run on Nitro OS 9 EOU on the Tandy Coco 3. This process starts by parsing these 3 name files and collects the types, constants, and variables into an in-memory structure of matching tokens, token types, and replacement lines. It then reads each line of the source file in sequence and looks for one of the following tokens. So add type, add constant, add var. If found, it skips the following white space and takes the string results of alphabetic, so upper and lowercase, plus underscore and trailing dollar characters for constants and variables as the name of the type, constant, or variable respective to the token. Nothing but white space should follow the name on the source line. Printed warning happens otherwise. It then replaces the token and name with the matching line from the types, constants, or variables B09 file, respectively, to the token type. Leading white space is preserved on the source line when writing to the output file. I want to modify this transpiler that converts my custom enhanced version of Basic09 to legal Basic09 code. The features this transpiler. Oh, I want to modify this transpiler first. Make Basic09 to legal Basic09. Yeah. The features this transpiler will include are listed below. I'm attaching the root projects folder build.sh file. This file is called from a project subfolder build.sh file with the 3 command line params: project, target type, and image name, referenced in the source code of this parent build.sh file. So just giving it the context of what the bash script currently does. And like I said, and the Basic09, but my focus on this week was just the bash. I asked it to please write the awk logic code snippet to work with these requirements. This code should first parse a global.b09 file located in the same folder as the source files to be transpiled, and store all types, constants, and variables in memory. Storing the token name. Oh, there's a typo there. Type and replacement value for each statement found in the file. Only write the new code changes. Here, I'll scroll up a little bit. Only write the new code changes as a single code snippet. I will perform the update to the original source, use the logic from the provided source, replacing the logic reading from types.b09, constants.b09, and variables.b09 with the processing logic for a global.b09 file in the same folder, which contains all types, constants, and variable declarations. So that was one of the first things. Is instead of having 3 separate files for types, constants, and variables, I wanted to unify all that into a global file that would be available to all source code within a given project. Then parse all files with the pattern startup b09 using the existing code as a guide to apply the changes described below. So again, global source file. So it's going to contain types, constants, and variables available to all modules in a given project. So one thing that I did change to this is instead of this being for variables, I think in the variables file it was dim. It was just actually Basic09 code, so dim session count integer. I changed that for this process to be var. So I've got a special, again, this is not, none of these are reserved, well, type is, but const and var are not reserve words in Basic09, so they will both be converted to dims, but I wanted to clearly differentiate them in the globals file, and it made more sense to me to have variables have the var, just so it's clear that in the globals. So this is where we get into the new features. Module source files. So I also want to create a module wrapper around a source file listing that will contain any number of procedures, but also have types, constants, and vars that are specific to that source file. So I can have global types, constants, and variables that for every source file in the project can be referenced. Anything declared in the module level are only available to procedures listed inside of that module block. So for instance, you can see here, so we've got add a type, add a const, so it's going to be pulling. So reading it would get from a global one, default session size it's getting from here, log count would be getting from here. Okay, language additions. So again, just to kind of, I guess is maybe a little redundant, but it doesn't hurt to be a little redundant for this. Types, constants, and variables can be defined in the global.b09 file at the top of the module definition or within a given procedure block. If there's a naming conflict, so this allows me to define types, constants, and variables in my sort of pseudo Basic09 code at 3 different levels. And if there's a naming conflict, it resolves procedure, then module, then global. So you can always override at the local if you want to use the same name, but it has a different value. And again, I put a nice note in here saying it only understands type, param, and dim. Constant var would be transpiled to dim statements, and const declarations would need a new line where the dim variable is assigned the literal value from the const statement. So again, here's my example. I've got a type, constant, a var. So the procedure looks like this, and this is the transpile. So for a type, it'll take reading, find it here, and just replace it with the full thing. Max readings for here is a constant. It would take dim max reading integer, and so I can declare the whole thing like this, and then it'll transpile that so that there's a separate line for the declaration of the variable, and then an assignment of the variable, and then a variable declaration up here will just be dimmed. I suppose I could also have value assignments, but I didn't. I just wanted to have the variable. I wanted to allow the code to define, again, the sort of difference between a constant and a variable. A constant isn't supposed to be a changing value, so that's why it's declared in the meta here, whereas the variable is meant to just sort of have the same declaration of structure of a variable, but it'll be up to the individual procedure to assign its values. Okay. In addition to this, any reference to constants within other dim statements needs to be replaced within the literal value of the constant during the transpile. So this is another thing that I added in. So again, if I had dim readings in my source code and I put integer and then max readings, so max readings is 100, it'll transpile that and put the 100 right. It'll replace it out. So again, Basic09 doesn't allow you to use variables in dim lines. You have to do literal numerical values for the size of an array, for example. So that's what this is, a new piece of functionality that I wanted to add. Select case. So again, another weird, well, from a modern view, a weirdosity of the way that Basic09 deals with if-else statements is that you can only do an if-else block. You can't do if-else if-else if kind of logic. So if I wanted, even if you write it like this, internal to Basic09, it basically treats this if as a nested if inside of the else block. So, which is why you always need to have a terminating end if for every if in this chain. It just makes it really kind of harder to read, and it also doesn't allow for some more sophisticated logic. So I've added in a select syntax. You can select off of a value, and then you can put case 1 and it'll do that logic, case 2 or 3 it'll do that logic, and then it also has a default, so if the value doesn't match any of those values that are specifically defined, it'll do that last line, and then we have an end select. And so then the transpiler will take that and convert all of that into proper Basic09 code. Enum statements. So again, another thing you can't do is being able to have, like here, a color where I wanted to have like red, green, and blue, and if you want to refer to it inside of my meta Basic09, you can go color.red, so it reads a little nicely, so you know that this red is assigned to here, but then it will transpile that to dim each of the values inside. So this color goes away, and it'll just take those and dim them as specific variables. And then if color equals red, it'll strip out the color dot and just put red in there. So that allows you to, again, in my source that I want to create, I want to be able to have an enum and refer to it as color dot value, or like enum dot value, but it'll strip all that sort of syntactic sugar out and then just put in proper Basic09. Labeling. So both for error handling and for go sub, on error or on value go to and go subs, you can only put line numbers after the go to or the go sub, but I wanted to add labeling, and again it'll figure out the numbering and all that sort of stuff for you. So again, inside of my application logic, I could have good value and then do some code and return, bad value, do something and return, error handler, do something and end. And then it'll transpile that to actual line numbers, and it will put line numbers like that. All right. And I think I also, again, I don't think I explicitly said this, but based on the example, I wanted my error go to be sort of at the bottom of the listing. I haven't thoroughly tested this. I'm kind of curious if I really started to get complex, if this would break, but at least as far as the basic example, it worked. So essentially it's going to replace the label name with a numerical line number, create that line number instead of the label name, and it'll also help put whatever your label was, it'll put that as a comment as a concatenated comment at the end of the line. Okay, and then I gave it a full transpile example. So this is in my global.b09, here's the source, so that's what these ones are. And then I created a source module.b09, and this is where I have my module, gave it a name. Again, the name doesn't matter because it gets stripped out, but there's my types, constants, and variables, and then I have references. And some of these are, so the reading is coming from the global, default session size is coming from the module, as is log count. I didn't put an example of procedure level type constant var declarations, so I didn't test that now that I think about it, but maybe I'll test that for next week. Okay, and then so in here we also have, so basically I wrapped up all of the examples that were up there into a single listing. So I've got my type constant var links, I added in a default session size here, I added in an enum, and oh yeah, there's my enum references down here. I added an on error go to error handler. Uh, oh, I also put a reference here so just to make sure that it isn't stripping out that value from non-dim statements. So I put that in there. And then this is just an example of a type declaration. So that's of a reading type. And then I added in an on value go sub, good value, bad value, and put labels down here. And then I have a select case example. So, and then in this one, I think there's also, I had two procedures just to show what it looks like when you're, because I want to have the same const in both, so I want to make sure that it's doing it in every procedure in the listing. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I don't know if there's anything else in this thing. I think that's basically the entire purpose of this procedure, was just to have an additional procedure to make sure that it isn't just stopping at the first one and it's doing the transpiling on every one. And then the end module down here again is sort of just to clearly indicate the end of the module. I might not even, probably don't even really need that, but it seemed to, it just seemed cleaner. So anyway, it gets stripped out. And then the output file. So this is what it should look like. And it's basically just all those transpiling changes. Now, interestingly enough, when I did give this, and I'll show this when I get to the actual conversations, I had a couple of errors in my output that I actually still had the transpiled stuff, so it wasn't actually proper Basic09 code. And we'll kind of cover that when we get to the results. Actually, why don't we do that now? I can do that now. Let's go to here and close that tab. So for every conversation, where's my scroll bar? Oh, there we go. Okay. Every conversation. Here we go. Close that one. Oh, interesting. What happened there? Can I? Oh, there we go. Yeah, okay. Get to the top. Okay, so everyone, I passed in my build.sh file and I pasted in that full conversation markdown document. And again, here I'll scroll and show you in my output file. Yeah, I left the select logic in here, so I actually did make a mistake. And okay, so let's start with ChatGPT because it was the biggest failure. So ChatGPT did give me awk code, but the only thing it looked like it implemented was the global.b09 file, because that's the only, this is the actual string replacement stuff, and all it did was basically look for in every source file type constant var and replace it. So it basically ignored almost everything in this prompt on a get-go. And I think, let me get to the very bottom again. Yeah, I just stopped. I didn't even bother because it didn't give me what I wanted. So ChatGPT was rolled out right away. Claude did give me a generated, in fact, it gave me a couple of things. I do kind of like the way that Claude, like it'll generate code into a separate file, and then it also gave me some code snippets in line with the conversation. But and it looks like it generated something that does do, like it has process enum, process labels, so it is doing a lot of, it looked like it did address all of the requirements, but I'll show you what the results look like when I ran it in a little bit. So it came close, but in the end, what it ended up generating was really wrong. Gemini, on the other hand, I gave it the build.sh file and the full transpiler conversation, and it wasn't perfect, but there were only 3 issues that I spotted, I think, off the get-go. One was it added in here, for some reason it thought it needed to escape the exclamation mark in the regular expression here for go sub. And while it didn't actually cause an error, it did cause a warning to show up when I ran it. And I'll show you at the conversation how I got it fixed. The only other things that it did was that it didn't do the proper indentation on the output for two specific features. But other than that, this worked almost completely correct out of the box, which I was pretty impressed with. Yeah, it was, at least as far as awk is concerned, Gemini writes really pretty good awk code. Okay, so let me show you the conversation on there. So this is the error that I got. In fact, all I did was copied and pasted the warning line that came out in the command line when I ran it, and said, this is what I'm getting. So it does give you the line number. And this is where it says, the warning is harmless but good to fix. It's happening because the exclamation mark isn't a special character in awk's regular expression, so it doesn't need to be escaped with the backslash. The warning is triggered by the regex used to find go-to-go-sub label definitions. So it found exactly, it knew the context of it was the go-to-go-sub label definition replacement logic, and it also recognized that, oh, I didn't need to do that backslash. So then it gave me a really nice clean fix. You just need to remove the unnecessary backslash before the exclamation mark. So locate the line and then get rid of that backslash. And then after making this change, save the file and the warning will disappear when you run it again. The script's logic will remain correct. And it was right. So I did that replacement, or that I deleted that backslash. And then I said, okay, there's a couple of white space issues. So the first one, const transpiles look to not maintain the same indentation for the value assignment line as the dim declaration. So the dim line was indented correctly, but the max readings equals 100 was right up against the left-hand side. There was no equal amount of spacing. Then it said, just as a little aside, I really don't like this type of pointless flattery. I would rather it just address the problem. This seems to be something that most model publishers seem to think is important. I guess maybe most people like this, but for me personally, I rather, I don't want a personality in my model. I want it to be a tool. But unlike ChatGPT, where I can actually give it a system prompt or there's some you can customize the model's behavior in the settings of your account. Mine doesn't do that. Google Gemini doesn't do that. You don't seem to have any way to customize it except for within your prompt. So I would have to prefix every one of my prompts with Gemini to say don't do this. And anyway, it's not egregious, but just a little nitpick. The print statement for const was applying the indentation to the entire multi-line string at once, causing the second line to lose alignment. The fix is to split the two-line const definition and print each line separate with the correct indentation. Oh, I see. So it was printing two lines and it was not adding the extra spacing. So this is what it told me to do. Find this code. So was the problem here. Let me see. So this is where it's going print, indent string, and then it's doing the full procedure name. And because that has a in the constant definitions, here, let me bring that up for a second and just show you. Global. No, where's my global one? That's up here. This. So it's basically taking that, and then it must have just concatenated them when it did a string manipulation elsewhere in the script. And then it put it all on one string and then new lined it, so it didn't add the extra spacing. So instead, back to my chat, instead it split it using, so it does have, there's a new line in there, and then each one it prints with the indent string and then the line. So I copied and pasted that in, and it fixed it. And then I said, okay, the select case is indenting all the lines but the closing end if ended by two extra spaces. and I think I did 2 passes at this, so I added an extra, and it didn't do it correctly, so I re-emphasized. To be clear, the end if slash end if line below has the correct indentation. The rest of the if else logic is indented too far. I think what it did the first time is it indented the end if line in further. Not sure why it misinterpreted that, but anyway. Okay, so then it said the indentation was being taken from the case statements instead of the parent select statement. Oh, interesting. Okay. I'm curious if that is actually true. Again, sometimes I do know that the reasoning that it gives may not always be correct. So if it's really important, you do want to just double check that what it's saying is actually true. But that does kind of make sense that if it was taking it from the case statement and not from the select statement, then it would actually have 2 extra spaces. So you only need to modify the select case logic. So it says look for the incorrect case block, find the select case processing section, which looks like this. And then replace it with the corrected version. And then this is what it gave me. And then you also need to declare the new select indent variable along with the other state variables at the top of the end block. So here is, this got replaced as well. And again, it was right. I didn't do anything changes to the code. I just took the code, copied and replaced it, and reran it, and it did work. The one thing that it didn't do, that Claude did, was with Claude, it gave you the full awk script, and then it says replaces the preprocessing logic because the original preprocessing logic was in the build.sh file, and this new one gets put into a separate awk file. It gave me instructions on how to replace my existing build script's transpiling source with the code that will call this new awk file. And this is correct. This part is correct, but like I said, the actual awk script is really, really wrong. It didn't give me, but Gemini, on the other hand, didn't give me those instructions, so that's where I had to come along and say, okay, how do I integrate this awk script into my original build.sh? The output currently prints to terminal. And then it said, integrating the awk script into your build script is straightforward. The key is to use the shell's output redirection feature to capture the terminal output and save it to a file. You'll need to replace the entire old preprocessing section with a new, simpler loop that calls your awk script. So save that to a file, which I did, and I named it gemini.awk and placed it in the same folder. Replace the preprocessing block. So take the section that starts from preprocessing step, and that's not an exact quote because I think it had this in there. Down to but not including the rest of your original build.sh logic, which I believe was also in my build.sh file. And then just paste it in with this. So this is basically just going, it defines a variable for the location of the Gemini awk file, and then replaces creates a new other variable for global des, which points to the global.b09 file in the source path. It errors out if it can't find that. It also errors out if it can't find the awk script, and then it does the transpilation. So it looks in the source path for any file named star.b09 minus global.b09, and then for each one, it increments a file's process, gets the relative path to the source file, creates a destination file using the same relative path. Oh, okay, yeah, so it's starting with the source file, it's going to put it in the same folder structure in the build path, and then creates the destination directory just to make sure that it's there, echoes out a line saying it's transpiling the file, and then does the awk call. So it passes in the awk script, passes in the global defs, or the location of global.b09 source file, and transpiles the results out to the destination file, and then it goes on. From here on out is basically the rest of the process that'll do the taking all the build file source and push it onto the disk folder, the disk file that I've got that I'm using in my Cocoa emulator that you've seen in previous weeks. And it gives me a little summary of what it does. And then the last thing that I realized as I was doing sort of my final look over was it was also carrying the module and end module reserved words in my new sort of meta Basic09. and putting those in the output. So that was the last fix. And it basically gave me an updated script, which did do that, but made some other things too. Okay, so here's the full. Instead of just giving me a patch for the parts to remove that module and end module, what it did was it rewrote the entire script. And I'll get down to the conversation because but it didn't say why it did that. Right, like you see here, it only showed me. It says includes the logic to only process and print procedure blocks. Replace the entire awk file with this code below. This requires adding a statement. This is I guess it did, but I didn't really. Maybe I missed that, or it didn't go into enough detail for me to understand. So it added a state machine to the processing pass where it tracks when it's inside a procedure and only prints lines during that time. And what that logic was essentially it would determine if it was inside a procedure when it first hits a procedure declaration, and it would go outside of a procedure when it hits the first end in the declaration. But in a procedure, you can have multiple ends because, like with error handling, your error handling, in my example anyway, was going to end the process. But I also wanted to have a clean end to the non-error logic because the error logic itself was at the end of the procedure. So I want it to stop running before it gets into the error logic. So I actually had two ends in my first example procedure. But again, it didn't give me that detail, which I found interesting. Again, models do have this tendency to do more than what you ask them to do sometimes, and this is one of those cases. So anyway, that's where I came up with the question, why are there so many differences from the version we were working on up until now? And this is where it gave me that extra reasoning. So the latest version needs to produce a file that a real Basic09 compiler would accept, and that compiler doesn't understand anything outside of a procedure end block. And then it gave me a sort of create a gatekeeper to say whether it's in procedure or not. And then I said, okay, well, the module and end module lines are gone, but the error handling code also went missing at the end of the add reading in my example module. This is the code that I'm referring to. So this block of code went away. And it said, not sure where that second end comes from, but anyway, my apologies, the previous logic was too aggressive in how it handled the end statement. You're correct, the error handling code and go sublabels were being cut off. So again, and he gave me a correct reasoning for the bug too. So the script was treating the first end statement it encountered as the definitive end of the entire procedure, and Basic09 end is often used to stop the main flow of logic before it accidentally runs into subroutines or error handlers placed at the bottom of the procedure. The script saw the first end, switched to state to I'm no longer in a procedure, and then skipped printing everything that came after. So the fix is to make the logic smarter. Procedure doesn't end until the next procedure begins or the entire module ends. So the end keyword should just be treated as a regular line of code to be printed. And then it gave me a corrected script. And this one, on the other hand, did work. So that was my process for getting this to go. So now let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and then let's look at the actual inputs and outputs, just again to kind of clarify this. So this is my source file. Again, so there's my global. I've got a type, constant, and a var. Again, this is exactly the same code as was in the Transpile modifications prompt that I showed you earlier. Source.b09 is the same pre-transpiling source module. So again, we have that module. We've got types, procedure. Oh, that's why it's got an extra end, because that's another bug. I'll have to pull that out next time. Actually, I can delete that here because I'm actually working on the actual source file. Okay, so that's there. And then there's my end module. Okay, so the output here. So this is the actual build that runs from the Gemini script, and it does everything correctly. Now, one thing I forgot to do, I guess. I didn't test this in Basic09, so there might still be some Basic09 bugs in here, but it did match exactly what I gave it when I did correct my transpiling output. Again, there's that extra end. So it did actually give a perfect line for line transpiling from the example that I had in my transpiler modifications thing. I think there may have been an extra line space somewhere, but nothing significant. So I got a really good example. Now, let's look at what Claude did, just to sort of wrap this up. Claude, on the other hand, like I said, it did do a full transpilation, but as you can see quickly, so again, it still did the module thing. Again, if you look at my example output, I didn't have the module end module in the output file source, even in the non-corrected one that I gave both models. Both of them, for some reason, decided to keep that in. Not quite sure why, but the real problem was, it did type replacement, it did do the constant, and it got the line spacing correct. This was the weird stuff. Where was it getting these line numbers from? I don't know why it decided to do this, and in fact, yeah, I don't even know. These seem to be completely made up. It's like it just completely hallucinated some of the logic. It did do the enum. It looks like they did the enums correctly. Again, don't know why I gave it a line number with nothing. On error, go to 600. Well, that's not right, because 600... Oh, so it didn't get the numbering of line numbers correctly. What else did it do wrong? Yeah, it had all these weird line numbers for whatever reason. Don't know where it got that from. I probably could have cleaned that all up. Although, like I said, it got line numbering all kind of run. So here's my good value, bad value. So it did get good value, bad value correctly. Oh, it also did the exact same problem with the select case logic, where it did the extra indentation, seemed to base it off of the case and not the select. So I found that interesting, that Claude and Gemini both made this couple of the same mistakes. But like I said, Claude was just far worse because, again, it just made up all these line numbers for I don't even know why. And it also created, continued the line number incrementing in new procedures. I don't think I tested that in Gemini because I didn't have any line numbers in the second one. So I'm thinking of all sorts of edge cases as I walk through this that I probably want to go in and test and maybe make some modifications to. But, for the requirements that I gave it and the examples that I gave, Gemini did a far, far better job. So that's kind of one of the conclusions that I have from this, is that my go-to model when I want to do code generation of any type is going to probably be Gemini from now on, just because it seemed to follow the instructions and examples much more to the letter than Claude, and certainly ChatGPT. Another caveat, I'm using the free version of Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini. I do know if you get the pro version of ChatGPT that you get access to a better coding model, I'm pretty sure. So maybe if you had a paid ChatGPT, you'd get better results. But Gemini's winning on because of two factors. One, like I said, the free model worked far better than the free model of the other two. And two, it also has a much larger context window, so you can actually hand it larger source and text examples and instructions than either of the other two models can handle. So it's a lot more flexible and it's a lot more accurate. So that's my conclusion for this week, is that if you're going to use code generation, you use a model for code generation, my recommendation, at least as of August of 2025, is Google Gemini. It seems to do a far better job of following the instructions to the letter and not hallucinating odd new behavior like these line numbers that Claude did, and it doesn't just ignore whole sections of the instructions as ChatGPT did. Okay, so that's the end of this video. I'm going to next week go and try and do the exact same thing for Basic09. I'll probably have to make some modifications to my prompt to add in the clarity of how you write basic, and sort of merge my best practices document that I've been, where's that down here? So bestpractices.md, this is where I've been creating a big list of do's and don'ts for writing Basic09 code. I didn't give this to any of the models, specifically because I had the examples of exactly what I wanted to be done. It doesn't have to write new Basic09 code, it just had to take what it could assume that the meta Basic09 code that I gave it was correct, and it just needed to do the string replacements. I may need to, because it was doing it in awk, Google Gemini in particular, but I'm assuming all of the models are quite good at writing awk code because it's a modern and well used utility. Whereas Basic09, like I said, is very obscure, and that's where you have to give it a lot more hand-holding of this is how you write proper Basic09 code. So that'll be next week. So I'll be curious to see if when I get my prompt together with all the extra stuff that I've learned from my last time getting it to generate Basic09, and merge that with my Transpile modification to see how it does as far as code generation goes. I will probably also do the same process of handing all of the same prompt data to the 3 different models just to see again which one writes Basic09 code better, but based on the results from this week, I'm anticipating Gemini will probably be the one that will do the best job. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.